Welcome back to another episode of the Stop and Pop. I have Aaron Bollwinkel, hope I ain't botched that, and he writes basketball content for the Live, Read, Ball on Substack. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Good.
So I love the quote you have on your blog that says, "Basketball is not a sport; it's a way of life," and you indeed live by that. So going into that, I want to ask you about your college basketball trip. Explain that.
Yes.
How did that start out?
So my dad has been involved in basketball my entire life. He was a very good basketball player and football player, decided to play football because he's 5'10" and a half. Didn't think he was going to be able to play basketball. Turns out he wasn't very good at football either, at least in terms on the higher level. His favorite joke is that when he's at the University of California, he played ass back, which meant every time he got close to the field, the coach told him to get his ass back. So after college, he became a graduate assistant at Cal and got back into basketball. So that's kind of the grassroots of it. My dad was then a coach at the college level for 25 years. He was actually the head coach at St. Mary's College, preceding Randy Bennett, who has had a lot more success than he did and has been there since my dad, unfortunately, was no longer the coach. After that happened, he became a scout. So kind of in all of that, obviously, that engendered a lot of my love and passion for the game. And my dad and I have always had that as a very central point of our connection, and just something that we can always kind of fall back on as something that's a safe space for us to communicate and stuff about. So I don't really know what the genesis of it was, but about 12 years ago, he got the idea for me to join him on one of his scouting trips. So he scouts for the Bulls, been doing that for 19 years now. He travels a ton. In fact, when we checked in at a hotel recently, the guy mentioned that he had stayed 150 nights at a Marriott the prior year. So he gets around quite a bit, and I try to jump on as much as I can. I work in the restaurant industry, separate of what I do here. So to the best of my ability, we try to facilitate it. But because I have a significant knee injury, I was able to do a very long trip with him this time. So I was able to go for 10 days. We've been doing this now for 12 years since the first time that we did it. So every time that I can, I join him. I think that maybe we've missed it one time, and we did have one year that was pretty funny. A lot of times I travel with them during the conference tournament time, just because it's a very good way to be able to optimize the amount of games we're seeing. Because if you're going to conference tournaments, especially in the earlier rounds of those, it's 4 games in a single day, so we might catch a 4-game slate. And so I was actually with him the day before COVID kind of shut the entire world down. Yeah. So, and now this time I was able to stay ahead of all the inclement weather because we were traveling through the Midwest on this trip. So it was 10 games in 11 days through 7 states. So we were Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, Texas, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure I forgot somewhere, but it'll come back up to me because I don't think that made 7. But it was a great trip. He and I have always done this. I had a major leg injury 9 months ago where I tore some ligaments in my knee actually dancing at my wedding reception. So kind of an interesting way to punctuate the event. So I had microfracture surgery 3 months ago. But the upside of that was I have a little bit more flexibility of time. And so he and I got to get together for 10 days, which is longer than we ever have. So it's great because I really enjoy having that time with my dad. But for what I do now and am trying to do more so, it was really great because I got to see a lot of high-level basketball and a lot of NBA-ready prospects. I probably saw 10 guys that are going to go in the first 40 picks and probably about 15 guys that'll be drafted within the next 2 years, bare minimum. So that was awesome.
Okay, yeah. That's dope. That's a great way to connect with your father, a great way to see basketball. So, like you said, it's a way of life. So
Yeah.
So that's dope. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the Orlando Magic, who are currently 8th place at 22 and 18, right behind my Knicks, who they just unfortunately beat not today.
Just finished that big win for them, yeah.
And Banchero had 20 points. So let me ask you, do you think the Magic are legit right now?
I mean, I think that question kind of has to be qualified in terms of what you think their trajectory is. Do I think that they're a legitimate team that scares somebody if they have to face them in the playoffs? Absolutely. Especially because their identity is so centered on defense. And so they're the type of team. And look, did you get to see any of the game today?
Yeah, I did.
So that's two teams that were playing tough, hard-nosed, old school kind of Eastern Conference basketball, right? And nobody wants to see that in the playoffs because at the very least, it's going to be a war of attrition where you're going to wear somebody down in the first round. I don't think that with their youth and with some of the issues that they have in terms of their roster kind of as a whole conception, I don't think that they can do more than maybe scare somebody in the first round, possibly get out of the first round. But if they're the 8th seed right now, I think that's too big of an ask. And the only team in that top 4 that I think maybe they would have a fighter's chance again in terms of possibly upsetting them would be Milwaukee, just because it's such a different type of, they're so different in how they do things. And Orlando can throw so many big bodies on the perimeter at Giannis that it could give them a little bit of fits. And then you got Jalen Suggs just chasing Damian Lillard around potentially. But for where they've been to where they are right now, they're so far ahead of schedule that I don't even think that really matters for them. This is a franchise that's had one season over 500 since Dwight Howard left, and that was in the 2019. They've made 2 playoff appearances since Dwight Howard left. One of those was the bubble season where they were 33-40, and they only have 2 total playoff wins again since Dwight Howard left. So for them, just getting in there and showing some competitive spirit and getting those young guys used to what playoff basketball looks like, that is so much more important than them doing anything that they're playing with house money.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've been watching their games, and it was a game against Boston. I think Boston could have won that game, but they was legit in that game the whole time, and then they was up at a point that it really held Jason Tatum to some tough buckets, and I'm like, maybe this team is legit, can be a playoff contender, but I know at one point it was like top in their conference, but now they slowly dropping off. With that being said, Cole Anthony's having a really good year coming off the bench for them. Do you see him as a 6-man a year candidate long term, or will he probably have to become a starter at this point?
So I think a couple things. So I am not necessarily as high on Cole Anthony as most people are. I think that as a kind of Vinnie Johnson microwave guy off the bench, Cole Anthony is perfectly situated. But he's 4th on the team in minutes per game right now. I think that's a little over where I want him to be, especially because for Cole Anthony to get going, and it's tough because he just had a huge 4th quarter. He was the reason they probably won that game against the Knicks because he really got going and gave them a lot of energy. And he's got some toughness. And the thing that I really respect about Cole Anthony is the moment is never too big for him because he has so much self-confidence that he's gonna play his game no matter what.
Yeah, come on.
Now, the problems with his game for me, especially as a starter, and with that Magic team particularly, is he's not a true point guard. He's kind of a 1.5 in a point guard's body. He's not a good enough shooter to be a 2, but he's not a natural distributor. He's got to do a lot of work to get his own shot. He's he's actually 4th now amongst all reserves in terms of shots that come after 7 dribbles or more. So it's a lot of Cole Anthony dribbling to get into his actions. And that's fine in fits and spurts, but I think sometimes he hijacks kind of their offensive continuity, and considering that they don't really have a true point guard, they need somebody at that position that's getting that many minutes to be a little bit more of a facilitator than he is a lot of the time. And the Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs minutes looked pretty good today, but you have some issues with that just in terms of size and kind of, again, no real facilitator there. Now, Paolo's great at that. Franz Wagner's great at that. But I think you still need somebody that's able to get you into your sets, get the ball moving a little bit more, especially when you need kind of those possessions where you're just going to settle down for a minute and let's get something going. Cole Anthony's going to dribble the air out of the ball a little too much. He's been awesome for them off the bench. I actually like Mo Wagner a little bit more as a bench player for them because of what he provides, but I don't also want to mitigate what he has given to them as kind of an offensive spark plug.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. That was a good stat that you dropped there too. So then, with that being said, since you said that you feel like they need a point guard, I was reading reports that they are looking to make a deal straight away Markelle Fultz and Wendell Carter Jr. So you think they should go after traditional point guard with one of those players?
So for me, I think that they have 2 real needs right now. They need a point guard. They don't have to go like star hunting. I would immediately call Washington and see what's up with Tyus Jones. I think that obviously
Washington said that we're going to trade for both sides.
Yeah, I think it's beneficial because Tyus obviously is a little bit marginalized in that Washington system. He's an adult in the room. He plays the type of basketball that we're talking about as a facilitator and a guy that can kind of get you out and get out on the break with all those long guys on the fast break for them that I think would be perfect. In terms of Wendell Carter Jr., I love him. I think you have to move him because they have this three-headed monster at center. They've already proved that they can be competitive at the level they need to be without him. And Wendell, for as much as I love him, hey, I'm also a Chicago Bulls guy. I think that when they traded him away, obviously that was like the inflection point for the Magic where they're at now. But he can't stay healthy. You know, he's never played more than 62 games in a season. He's not going to this year. And so his value is as high as it's probably going to be. His contract is also an amazing contract. So that's the tough part. He actually signed a deal. They have him under a contract for 2 more years. It's a declining contract in pay. You got 14 million last year. It's 10 million by the end of the contract. That's a rarity. So I think maybe if you can position that with the team that you're trading for, look, you have this guy locked up for 2 years. It's player friendly. What else can you give us? Golden State, if they're willing to come off Moses Moody because the Magic needs shooting, that's kind of the other thing. Their perimeter shooting is lacking. If you could get like Moses Moody or something like that, or I would even see with Portland, like I'm not opposed to Malcolm Brogdon rental. Brogdon does have some of those same injury issues, but I think he can make some sense as an adult in the room again. You have him for 2 years. He can shoot the ball. He defends well. You can play him together with Jalen Suggs because those guys are a little bit interchangeable in terms of their positional at 1-2. Those would be guys that kind of immediately come to mind, but I definitely think that they've got to go out and get a true point guard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Tyus Jones trade would be ideal. I seen someone on Twitter, one of my friends, he was talking about it, trade Tyus for essentially Fulton. You know, the Wizards, they need all the help they can get. So I think it would be a perfect trade for both sides.
Yeah.
So the next question I wanted to ask you was, you said that you met Stan Van Gundy. So talk about that experience.
Well, so the Van Gundy experience actually is kind of more of a familial tale. So my dad has known the Van Gundys for 50 years, basically. So Stan's parents, Bill and Cindy, I think I'm getting the mom's name right. I've known them since I was 5 years old. So Bill Van Gundy, there's a basketball camp called Snow Valley Basketball Camp, which is a really well-known basketball camp, kind of for a little bit more instructional camp than kind of the camps that we see now that are just kind of opportunities for guys to kind of.
The camp that we see with Stan Van Gundy had the hands to work out and everything.
Probably. I don't know if Stan's worked Snow Valley. I wouldn't be surprised if he has, but I know that Bill used to work it a lot of times. So when I was a really young kid, Bill used to like suffer me being a little pain in the ass, running around just trailing my dad. But my dad actually, the Van Gundys used to live in the Bay Area. So when my dad was a high school coach, there's ties all the way back to him being a high school coach 40-something years ago with the Van Gundys. Kind of fast forward, Stan ends up taking the job at Wisconsin to fill in for Stu Jackson. I don't know if you know Stu's name, but Stu was kind of the second guy in charge in the NBA for quite some time. I don't know exactly what he's doing for the NBA now, but I know he's still involved. When he left, Stan took over the job, and my dad actually was retained as his assistant. So for 1 year, my dad was Stan's assistant at Wisconsin. It was actually Michael Finley's last year there, which is kind of a tie for me because I ended up being a huge Michael Finley fan. Stan ended up needing somebody to babysit, and I was a babysitter for him for several occasions, you know, when I was however old I was, 9 or 10 then. He's still a person that if I, you know, he messaged me not that long ago because he was in town and wanted to come for dinner. He's not like, I don't know Stan personally much anymore, but the Van Gundys and their family are people that I can shoot him a text message right now just saying hi and stuff like that. And Stan's always been somebody, obviously, I have a great amount of respect for because of how he's been able to succeed in the way that he did. And clearly him and his brother and his parents have such amazing basketball minds, you know, and I think it's a little bit unfortunate at times that their style has become something it feels a little bit anachronistic, right? Like that kind of barking, yelling coach thing. I think he's gotten a little bit more of a bad rap than he deserves for some of that. But it's just kind of how the league's changed. You know, even talking about Orlando and kind of his ties there, you know, he gets fired from Orlando And that was basically the last run of Orlando competency. And sure, Dwight Howard is obviously the main reason for that. But Stan won 50 games 4 seasons in a row, and then he was well over 500 this following year. Stan's an interesting guy. He's always going to have a Diet Coke with him. He's a very intense guy, but he loves basketball in a way that just always comes through. And it's something that I will kind of always permanently respect. And so I love hearing them on TV. I love their breakdowns. I just think that they do a better job than most in terms of diagnosing what's happening, but also being able to distill it in a way that's very relatable to people. I don't know if that totally answered the question. I kind of went on a jag, but
no, that was perfect. That was perfect. Because I love Stan Van Gundy, definitely as well. Stan, I remember him being in Detroit and really trying to change that franchise around for a little bit. And I feel like he should get another job. Same thing with Jeff. I believe Jeff is working with USA Basketball on some platform. I think he's working with the 17 under, if I'm correct.
But he's also, I think he's a special advisor, I believe, with the Celtics this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a special advisor for somebody. I think it's them, but don't quote me on that. I may have missed that part.
I did see that he got some type of coaching role somewhere. I don't remember exactly where.
Yeah. The Detroit thing for Stan was tough because I think it was one of those situations, unfortunately. I'm not a big fan of the coach being the GM. I mean, we have this conversation all the time. Some people want to be like, well, the chef should get their ingredients. But coaches oftentimes, especially in the throes of the season and things like that, I think it's hard to have that kind of broad spectrum macro view. Plus, you're so personally attached to players and things like that. I think the decision-making sometimes just gets a little muddled up and cloudy there. And so I think that hurt Stan as much as anything because you look at those Detroit teams, the rosters weren't great when he got there. They were very competitive for a minute, and then it kind of fell off, and it fell off so quickly that he got blamed in ways that it wasn't totally fair. But because he had so much power, it was hard to point the finger at anybody else.
Yeah.
So
you need somebody to point it at.
Yeah.
I think, if I remember correctly, was he there when Josh Smith was there? Josh Smith.
I have to look at the roster, but yes, he definitely had Josh Smith for a minute there, and that was the hard part is they brought Josh Smith in thinking he was going to be Josh Smith from 4 years before, and he wasn't. His game just didn't cater to the loss of athleticism for himself. He didn't have enough skill. And it's not a knock on Josh Smith. He was awesome because he was one of the best athletes in the league and he was so versatile. But guys like that don't have much else to offer once they lose their athleticism, well, then people are holding on to them in this hopes that they can still produce. Like, no, unfortunately, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So I think the last question I want to ask you about, so Jack is going to be the first person to get a Magic jersey retired.
Yeah.
So, rightfully so. So, who do you think would be next? That's the first question. And then after that, will they retire either T-Mac's jersey or Penny Hardaway's jersey? Or both?
So to me, the next guy needs to be Dwight Howard. Now, the problem is just the time frame doesn't necessarily work because of when Dwight Howard retired. And I mean, he's not even technically retired, right? Like he's still playing. So that's the tough one. It's difficult because even with Shaq, I get the retiring his jersey thing. Shaq only played 4 seasons for the Magic. So it's almost like you're retiring his jersey because of his legacy as a player overall more than you are for his time with the team.
I was thinking
that's the issue with T-Mac and Penny as well. The Magic franchise, unfortunately, has this kind of history of being a way station for stars more than an actual landing spot permanently. They only have 2 players that have ever played 10 seasons for the franchise in the entire franchise history, and that's Nick Anderson and Jameer Nelson, pretty good player. But so they don't really, all their stars end up being stars for other people. Now, some of that time it's been trades. Some of those things, Penny and Dwight Howard, unfortunately, there was injury issues, but also those guys kind of moved on to greener pastures. Then Oladipo, Sabonis, and Vooch get dealt. But I mean, I would make an argument that they shouldn't really be retiring anybody's jersey based on how they played in Orlando. So otherwise, Penny, Penny's just one of those great what ifs, and it's so sad what happened to his career. And he was so important to the league because of his style of play and how that ended up being kind of a transformative period. Obviously, everybody had been looking for the next kind of Magic, and Penny ends up being that guy eventually. So then we get back into this, let's find a big guard. They have T-Mac, who was great there. But, when I think of T-Mac, I don't think of T-Mac necessarily his greatness with Orlando. I probably think of it more with Houston than anybody. So it's just kind of it's difficult. And it's unfortunate for them as a franchise that they just don't really necessarily have that singular kind of hitching post as a guy that really is the franchise's identity.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with that because I always said like T-Mac's prime was very short-lived to me, especially in Orlando. Like he led the league in scoring, but after that, I mean, he's had great seasons with the Rockets, but other than that, it's like nothing really significant, especially in Orlando, because we all know about the whole playoff series when they lost to Detroit. It was up 3-1.
Yeah.
So that's one thing the Magic can look at about their success with him, but overall, like, hasn't been a lot of sustained success with those players.
Yeah, T-Mac burned really bright. I mean, he's got about an 8-year window that at least statistically is about as good as you're going to get. But, competitively, there's a lot of questions. And look, it's a team game, so I'm not going to get too caught up in that stuff. But it is tough when a guy doesn't get out of the first round as the best player for a team no matter what, because the players that we think of on the level that T-Mac is sometimes included in are guys that just by sheer force of will win those rounds. You know what I mean? He's not the first guy that's been stuck in a difficult situation where his roster didn't look like it was supposed to because of the Grant Hill injuries or the stuff kind of with Yao and things like that. But I love T-Mac. I think maybe sometimes we put him a little above where he needs to be because there was a little bit of empty calories overall. It's tough because I don't want to be in the business of I'm not trying to like downgrade Tracy McGrady's individual performance. The guy was awesome. Yeah. But it's just kind of tough to, look back and be like, oh, T-Mac, the Orlando Magic T-Mac, that was like peak player moment at that time. It's like, yeah, he was great on a team that wasn't as good as it should have been, but that wasn't his fault. But also, yeah.
I understand both sides of it because I always said, like, all right, T-Mac's in the Hall of Fame. I understand why he's in the Hall of Fame, but at the same time, like, you could make a case of why he shouldn't be in a way because of the lack of success. Like individual, like you said, individual player, great. Team success, not so great. Yeah. That's my only knock about T-Mac. It's just like, he never had the major success with the team, which bad luck, no injuries, it happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to thank you for being on my podcast.
Yeah, of
Don't
course.
forget to check out his blog as well. He's on Threads. Drop all your hints for us. Say everything you want to say. Yeah,
so I mean, the big thing is the Live, Breathe, Ball newsletter. You can find that on Substack. My handle, Aaron_Bollwinkel, kept it pretty simple with a last name like that. It's pretty easy to find. Those are kind of the main areas to check me out. I'm going to continue to kind of try to build all this, and I'm much like yourself. I'm doing everything I can to engage in this kind of space and throw out as much basketball content as I like because I love doing this. I really enjoy it. And being a steward to the game and being able to talk about the game and texture and things like that matters. And I love it. And it's like, we're not sitting here shouting about hot takes, which is also my favorite thing because I don't want to be doing that. I actually want to be having. So for anybody that's interested, my newsletter is very specifically focused on kind of substantive stat kind of breakdowns. And then you'll get a little of my opinion-based stuff and a lot of other things kind of thrown in there in the mix. So if you like kind of increasing your basketball IQ, I'd like to think that it's an opportunity to do that somewhat. But otherwise, keep an eye out for me because I'm gonna keep coming along.
Definitely is. Like you were dropping stats, and I'd be like, oh, I didn't know that. Like the stats you told me earlier about Joel Embiid with his streak. I didn't know that.
Yep. 17 games today, and Joel Embiid is definitely hunting it. But his team, I believe, now is 14-3 in those 17 games. So hey, hunt all you want as long as team success matters. Get it.
It works. If it's working, keep doing it.
Yeah.
But thank you for being on. I'll talk to you later.
I appreciate you, sir. See you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.